Greetings, Talvi. Hope you're doing well and you've had a fantastic week. My name's Kyle and I represent the Puretide program, and today I'm going to be bringing you a very special episode. And I'm going to be reviewing the meta, but I'm not going to be doing it with the same brushstroke that I've done in the past. I think the one thing that's available to us, way more than we've ever had access to in the past, is data. But actually, we don't look at the data properly when we're talking on YouTube videos and giving our kind of like thoughts around what is strong, what is struggling, what is overperforming, what is underperforming, because we just kind of look at the basic data available and have not really seen any proper breakdowns around which terrain formats this meta has been played on, whereabouts in the world, and they actually link in together. And the reason it links in, because we've got 3 terrain formats. And for those of you who are new, those 3 terrain formats are UKTC, which is obviously played predominantly in the United Kingdom. You've got WTC, it's for the World Team Championships, and that's held in Europe. So therefore, most of Europe will be playing on WTC. And then you've got North America, which is playing on the GW layouts, simply because GW do a lot of their majors and their opens in the US. So you've got 3 terrain formats, and there are some other terrain formats out there, like the FEC do their own, which is like a more dense version of the WTC. And this data is available to us on StatCheck, and you can filter it. So the reason this is important, because there's massive differences. And let me give you a very quick snapshot of what I mean. In North America, currently, Kion is at 60% win rate. So it's absolutely dominating the scene. But then in the UK, Kion's at 28%. So there's a 32% difference in performance there. So what's that saying? That all the people in the UK are rubbish at playing Kion? No, it's to do with the terrain format. There's some phenomenal players that play Tau, one of them being Will B, who's been running Kion for a long, long time. He's in the Puretide program with me, and me and Will go back a long time. And he was absolutely killing it with his Kion. But then has now switched to auxiliary card because Kion just doesn't currently work on that terrain format. And I agree, it doesn't. And then when we look at North America, auxiliary is performing at 38%, but in the UK, auxiliary is at 60%. So this data does have a big factor to factor in, I suppose, is that, Will's just jumped from Kion to auxiliary. So naturally, the percentage of auxiliary is going to go up. And there's another Tau player, Jack Downing, who's been playing auxiliary. So some good Tau players jumping on to a different detachment. But that's because they know that Kion will not currently work on the UKTC format, because it's not got the speed to get those firing lanes that we need. But then in America, you've got the GW format, which has these long firing lanes like UKTC used to have, therefore performing better. So it's not the level of player, it's the terrain format that's dictating the massive difference in percentage. So that's just one example. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a brief overview of Tau overall when you combine all of these locations together. And I'm going to show you where we're currently at. And then I'm going to break it down in terms of what's working in the UK, what's working in Europe, what's working in North America, and then on the flip side, what is not working so well in each of these regions that I've just stated. So let's get straight into the data, shall we? All right, so you don't need me to tell you that currently right now, the meta is being dominated by big robots and stinky boys. And by stinky boys, I'm talking about Death Guard. So when we look at the state of the game right now, I'm making sure that this is the one which clicks on all. Yes, it is. So we have Imperial Knights, Death Guard, and Chaos Knights roaming as the top 3 armies since the latest balanced data slate. So Imperial Knights are sitting at 59% with an overrep of 2, 10% are starting with the 4-0 event starts, and then you've got 10 event wins, and they're roughly equating for 66% of the meta. Jesus, 60% will be a nightmare. And then you've got Death Guard at 56, again, 18 event wins, and 9% of the player population. So that's 15%. And then when you look at the third and final one in the top 3, Chaos Knights at 56%, with 10 event wins and are accumulating to 5% of the current meta. So between these three armies, that equates to 20% of the player population. So if you look at that, when you go into GTs, there's 5 rounds. So 1 out of 5, you'll be going again into these one of these three armies, maybe more. So you've really got to plan your lists around dealing with these top 3. But then my take on this is that Tau's actually very good at dealing with the meta when it goes down the direction of thick city lore, or I'm going to take this stat check type of army that has high toughness, single model counts, and invulnerable saves and whatnot, because we have lots of resources available to us to play the screening, the scoring game, because we're relatively cheap for what we do. And then we've actually got some heavy hitters in our lists, whether it be hammerhead, railguns, skyrays, seeker missiles across the board on piranhas, on cheap chassis, and then we've obviously got crisis suits potentially with the Sunforge. We've got ways of dealing with it, and we can easily tailor our list to deal with these threats. And that's when Tau tends to perform a lot better, when the majority of the meta is one style of list, because it means that we don't have to water down our lists by putting in, units to deal with lots of infantry, or maybe we need to deal with lots of Terminator bodies, so we're taking plasma rifles. So the more and more the meta goes kind of one-sided, the easier it is for us when it comes to list building. But there lies another problem. Whereas people at the moment are cutting on to the fact that the meta is very toxic at the moment with Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, and Death Guard, that sometimes the way to beat them is to not play their game and take a list that they're also not going to be able to deal with. Give you an example, Orcs or Gene Stealer cults could just take mass bodies and go, you ain't got the guns to chew through this many models, so I'm going to win on points and you're going to be bogged down. And while the rest of the meta is tailoring for putting more melter guns, more anti-tank pieces in the list, they're also not taking for mass horde. So if you go to a list and go, hey, I've got Sunforge, Hammerhead, Railguns, Skyrays, and they go, I've got 200 bodies, bro, and you're like, shit. Okay, this is going to be a problem. So you always need to have a percentage of your list to deal with, like, hordes or mass bodies, but it's all about how much of the 100% of your list do you allocate to this particular function. So for me, before I'd try and keep it like 60-40, but now it might be 70% dealing with Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, Death Guards, so that tech could be more Skyrays, more Hammerheads, more Piranhas, and then at least have 30% to deal with like infantry. Because you're still going to go against Marine bodies, you're still going to go against potentially T-Suns, or maybe you're going to go against like Drakari that got MSU everywhere. So you still need to have elements in your list that can tackle this, but you need to be really hyper fixated on the current top 3 armies, because those are the ones that are going to be in contention to win or maybe podium in an event. So looking into Tau. So right now, Tau's sitting at 47% overall, which is a good place. Right? We're getting closer and closer to that balance. Right? I thought that we would finish around about 51%, but I still think if it continues this way, the longer this meta stays thick, the more opportunity we have to continuously grow from a performance perspective. And the detachments that are doing very well are doing very well for the reasons I've just said. You've got Kion, Montcar, and then Kroot Hunting Pack being our strongest 3 detachments overall. Kion naturally wants to catch up from the points mechanic later on in the game, and challenger cards right now are a way of assisting with this overall game plan. If you're behind, don't worry, you can obtain points very, very easily. So just a little bit of a side note on challenger cards. I'm going to acknowledge that they are currently not where they need to be in order to be functionally appropriate for the 40k right now. I think having a combat mechanic is good. I think it keeps the engagement between you and your opponent going, and it's stopping this age-old thing of like, oh, he's just tabled me in the first turn. I'm not going to waste the rest of my time playing this game because it's already, game, set, match, GG. So having some sort of catch-up mechanic is good because it gives you ways to come back and stop, think, come up with a new tactic, and then get back in the game. But right now it feels like if you are dominating a game, you're making all the right tactical decisions, you're forcing your opponent in a hole, or you're hemming them in the deployment zone, and you're tactically picking apart their pieces, whether it be their scoring pieces or whether it be the damage dealing pieces. You're then stopping them from scoring secondaries. You're achieving secondaries at a really good rate. You're maybe holding your primary and denying them their primary, and you're going, I'm doing all these things, and it's really, really good. But then your opponent goes, I'm existing and I'm scoring these up to 3 points every time I'm a challenger. So you're being penalised for being the better tactician, and your opponent's just getting awarded points for existing. That's not a catch-up mechanic. That is just, oh, here's your get-out-of-free jail card all the time. So I think, personally, it needs to change. And I think it will. We just need to give it some time, and it's in its infancy right now. So then if you go into the Kion and Montcar, we've got 3 event wins with Kion right now, and it's 53%. 11% are starting 4-0, and then you got Montcar at 49%, and 9% starting 4-0, no event wins, and then you got Crew Hunting Pack at 48%. So that stat check type of list that I was talking about, Crew can do that. You can just put all the bodies on the board, or you could do a list like Drew Salzborn and a few other Master Shapers out there are running, 27 guerrillas. So I think it's 27. Yeah, 27 guerrillas. So 18 rampagers, 9 Crew Tox riders, and then all tanks and Shadow Summon guiding units, and going, I've got T6 5-wound models, and I've also got these T10 14 wound tanks that are just going, hi. 13 wound tanks. 13 wound tanks. I don't know what my brain does when I think about hammerheads, but gone. Anyway, so tanks, toughness, 10, lots of crew tox and rampagers, or alternatively going mass crew and going, I'm just going to score, block you, and win the game that way. So it's doing very well. And then the other detachments that are struggling and trailing behind or underperforming is Retaliation Cadre at 44, Auxiliary at 43, and EPC, Experimental Prototype Cadre, at 39. So it's not having much representation, but it's falling behind the curve from Montcar, Kion, and Crew Hunting Pack. And then if you look a little bit closer in terms of the meta matchup overview, it gives you a breakdown of what factions this detachment is overperforming, underperforming, and balanced. So if you look here, it's saying that it's a 50% win rate versus Chaos Demons. So balanced against this, you win some, you lose some. But then the positives, if you have a look here, 2 out of the 3 top 3 armies in the meta, we are comfortably beating. Death Guard at 56, Imperial Knights at 60%. And then one of them is at 33%, which is the Chaos Knights. This is weird. I'm going to give you a little bit of a segue in terms of my thoughts on why this is. Imperial Knights can easily be blocked. Big Knights can move through terrain with your own models, but not if you physically block them from landing within engagement range. So if you can stop them from moving over you and saying, well, if you go here, you'll be within engagement, so you can't do it, you block them. And they don't have any ways of clearing a screen through mortal wounds. Yes, they have shooting, but no mortal wound output. Whereas Chaos Knights have multiple ways of making you take mortals through failed battle shock tests, and then also the Abominant class Knight has an ability where they can make you take a battle shock with 1 visible unit within 24, and then every unit that's within 9 at the end of their move phase takes on a 3+ D3 mortal wounds. So when people are maybe putting out screens in the same way that they would do against Imperial Knights, they're thinking that'll be safe, and then suddenly it's gone away through mortals in the movement phase and battle shock tests, and then they shoot the rest of it away on another screen and then get into the cookie jar. And I think that has a big part to play as to why we're only winning a third of the games versus Chaos Knights, because you would think that if you can deal with Imperial Knights, you can deal with Chaos Knights. So there's a couple of other reasons why in there, and if you are interested in joining the Puretide program, we do meta-analysis within the Chassel tier only, and I've recently done on this Sunday just gone a call where we sit down and discuss the meta a little bit like I'm doing today, but we go in detail in terms of factions, and there's plenty of faction focus reviews available in the content library on WOP, and I'll be adding to that more so over the next month and a bit, and just gradually adding a kick-ass library that's got everything you ever need to know around all these factions. So check out the link below and you can join and get those benefits. So Montcar. is the other detachment that's doing very well. And then Montclar's dealing with Death Guard, Shock Horror, Lethal's work. So Lethal's going to absolutely everything, and you've got the speed, and Death Guard are obviously quite slow. So you're able to keep to your strengths, which is speed, and obviously Lethals. You are on a timer, of course, for the first 3 turns, but that's usually enough to give you a good foothold in the game. And with your guns being able to deal everything they have to offer, then that's why we're currently in a very positive position versus Death Guard. And then we are doing, if you look at the other top 3, like I mentioned before, Imperial Knights were only at 10%, but Chaos Knights were at 44%. So it's not quite in the 50s, but it's still better than what Kaon's doing. But then the Imperial Knights is a strange one. So how can this be at 10% with 10 games played? And yes, you can say to me, well, it's because sometimes 4-ups can be 4-ups. And I get it. That's 100% stuff that can happen in games. But then I think there's a mechanic here that out of those 10 games, maybe we've not been approaching that matchup in the right way. And the way I'd approach Imperial Knights is that if they are taking multiple big knights, you shouldn't be rushing to try and kill as many as you can in that first turn. You know, you maybe can kill one if you're going first and you've got the relative scout moves and stuff to reach them. You know, the strike swiftly enhancement is phenomenal for this, and maybe you can kind of poke out, kill one big knight and let it be done. But if you're going after multiple big knights in an activation, you're doing it wrong. I know you're on a timer, but slow down. Do not rush into engagements, because the moment you start to lose resources at a high rate, the knights is going to end up walking over you the rest of the game. So you do need to pace yourself. So I don't understand why we're at 10%. I think we do a lot better than that, and I would be putting that into the positive, just like Kion. But clearly this data is not lying at the moment, and whether it be just unlucky dice rolls and lucky dice rolls on your Imperial Knights player, or if we're fundamentally doing something wrong, I don't know. I'm only speculating here because I'm not speaking to the players directly, but I think that's why this percentage is low. But the rest of the positives in Tyranids, Custodes, Space Marines is even as well. Really, really good against Drukhari, Sisters, Astra Militarum. And then the weaknesses are some of these kind of like high pressure armies like Orcs, Dark Angels, Eldari, and World Eaters. So that's a little bit of a snippet of the overall. So now let's drill into, I'm going to save the UK till last because it's spicy. Let's have a look at North America. Where's the Europe one gone? That one there. It's the UK. I just want to take this one. Just give me 1 second while I sort out this. Okay. So we'll look at Europe then. I did have it ticked, but just have to redo it again. Give me a second. So top 3 overall was Imperial Knights, Death Guard, and Chaos Knights. But then in Europe, you've got GSC at 62%, Chaos Knights at 59%, and then Sisters in 3rd position. So different. Yes, Chaos Knights exist there, and they're doing better. If you look at overall, Chaos Knights was at 56, but in Europe, $59. And then GSC 62%, whereas before they were at 56 overall. So the top 3 is different from overall top 3. So you need to, obviously, if you're in Europe, you need to make adjustments to your list to deal with more of an MSU, as well as some of the thick armies like Chaos Knights. You got Leagues of Votann, and Leagues of Votann are going to do very well currently in the meta because of the +1 to hit, +1 to wound. They're savage. So they are in a beautiful position to tackle the meta, and they still have mass shots to deal with MSU armies. So if you're in Europe and you're playing on WTC, you need to probably be tailoring for more anti-infantry than anti-big stuff. But you still have to take it because Chaos Knights are doing very well. So maybe that percentage of 70-30 goes down to 60-40. So 60% of guns and stuff in your list to tackle Chaos Knights, but then 40% to deal with Sisters and GSC. Okay? And then in terms of Tau are still sitting at 47% in Europe. But the detachments look slightly differently. So Kroot Hunting Pack has got the highest overrep and is at 52%. So Kroot Hunting Pack is the best detachment in Europe. probably because, again, WTC terrain format, you can utilize all the infantry that you've got, and then you've obviously got a lone op stratagem for your guerrillas, and you're just going to score, score, score. So Crew Hunting Pack doing very well. And also, I think the other thing to factor in terms of this data is in Europe, specifically WTC, a lot of the events are team events as well, because they're practicing for the WTC event itself. So yes, they might be winning, but they might be creating a list that's designed to blunt and just win by a little bit, rather than actually smashing face and going like a 15-5, because they have the different scoring metrics at WTC. So for every 5-point differential in your points, you're awarded 1 extra point when it's out of 20. So if you're 5 points ahead, it'll be 11-9. So there's a grading scale of how you win. Then you've got Montcar at 51%, Kion right in the middle at 50%. But I know that a lot of some European Tau players are leaning into, say, Tiger Sharks and Planes in their Kion list to help reach some of these nooks and crannies that are difficult to get to. Whereas Montcar is a very fast operation in terms of like plenty of scout moves, pathfinders, piranhas, potentially scout moving 2 of the units with the strike swiftly enhancement, and it really kind of utilizes the speed to get around some of those tight corners and the terrain format. So I understand why Montcar's doing very well, and Crew Hunting Pack. And then in terms of the detachments that are underperforming, you've got Retaliation at 41 and Experimental Prototype at 23, and then you've got Auxiliary CAD sitting at 44, but also is being tried in the same way that, Kion is, but what I would say about this data is it's still very young. It's in its infancy, because it's since the slate. So I think with a lot more events that are coming out, and we're going to have the LGT coming up shortly, and the WTC, there's going to be a big influx on data later down the line. So this is just early stages, but it's still important nonetheless. So then if you look at the meta matchup overview, and let's have a look at, say, what Crew Hunting Pack was doing really well into, 25 games played. And yes, we could filter the ELO, and I know we can do this, but right now I'm not going to focus on that because I do it already in the Better the Meta for the Chassels. And I think right now it's important just to look at the broad spectrum of things rather than like really filtering down to the top players versus top players. So Kroot is slamming Necrons into the ground, 88%, because the Necrons, clearly, if they're taking Star Shatter, they're taking the DDAs, they're taking the Silent King, and big stuff to tackle the Knights. But look at all those chickens, they can't deal with them, and therefore they just lose. So 80%. And then you've got Eldari, 100%, same thing. Oh, your Fire Dragons, cool. You've not even killed the unit of Kroot because I got a 5+ invuln. Dark Angels, Tyranids, T-Suns, Space Marines, Space Wolves, Chaos Space Marines, Dark Angels, and then struggling versus Votan, Empress Children, Imperial Knights, Demons, Sisters. So there's like almost like nothing's average apart from the World Eaters one, this is only one game played though, but it seems to be very clean of lots of wins, lots of bad matchups, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. So Crew Hunting Pack at 52, and then you look at Montcar, and on if we just assume that it's all being played on WTC, we got Death Guard, 60% win rate, Space Marines, Custodies, 57 and 71, Tyranids, 60, Sisters, 67, Guard, 100%, and then you're looking at some of the negatives. So the top 3 in Europe was GSC, Chaos Knights, and Sisters. So we're dominating the Sisters at 67. We're dominating the Death Guard, not Death Guard, sorry. Yeah, because Death Guard wasn't the top 3. Where's the GSC? Do they have GSC on there? Mm-hmm. No. And Chaos Knights, it's 25%. So we're dealing with one of the problems, Sisters. GSC we've not got games into. And then we're losing 75% of the time versus Chaos Knights. And then Kion being the most balanced at 50% bang on, losing into Eldari, Custodes, World Eaters, T-Sons, and Emperor's Children, beating Imperial Knights at 67, beating Sisters at 75, so Black Templars at 50, Blood Angels at 100, Space Marines, Tyranids, Leagues of Votann, Death Guard, and then having a look how they actually played Chaos Knights here. No. So again, Kion being a balanced approach, probably really helping with the fact that you got the Challenger cards going in your favour. But if you're on WTC terrain, you're probably going to want to look at Montcar or Kroot Hunting Pack. And I know Kroot Hunting Pack is definitely a style, a choice, and not everyone wants to play Tau Empire as Kroot. They want to play traditional Tau. So I would probably gravitate to Montcar, but you can't go wrong with Kion either. So in the WTC formats and that terrain, I would definitely center your list around more speed than your killing power, because you don't quite have the firing lanes that you would have on GW terrain or on the previous UKTC terrain. So I would definitely be looking at things like Piranhas, more Pathfinders, Devilfishes, so you could maybe put Pathfinders in the Devilfishes for scout moves. And then obviously you've got things like maybe a Crisis team with the Sunforge team with a Cold Star, or maybe a Plasma Fire Knife if you're going into a lot of Marine bodies, that kind of stuff. So a bit more speed to get around those difficult kind of firing lanes will serve you well. Okay, so now we look into, we've done Europe, now we look into North America. So North America, Tau is currently, give me 1 second while it loads. Has it changed the thing? Yes, it has. So give me 1 second. It doesn't like the fact that I'm opening it from multiple pages, so let's just adjust this now. So in North America, Imperial Knights, Death Guard, and GSC. So Imperial Knights at 59, Death Guard at 57, Gene Stealer Cults at 57% as well. Player population 6% for Imperial Knights, 8% for Death Guard, and then 2% for GSC. And then they've had 6 event wins for Imperial Knights, 9 for Death Guard, and 3 for GSC. Tau is currently sitting, there we go, 49%. 2 event wins, 4% of the player population in North America, which is obviously double. I think the overall for, what was the overall for Tau here? Give me a second. 2% or something it was, I think. So yeah, double the amount of Tau players in America than there are. I mean, it's just pure numbers, right? And if you look at the detachments here, 60% win rate with Kion on GW boards, with nearly a 2-point over rep, 1.94, 14% are going 4-0 event starts, and then 2 event wins. And then Kroot Hunting Pack at 52, 20% of them are going 4-0 event starts, no event wins, and then Montcar at 50%. Again, 1.9 over rep, and 10% are going in 4-0 event starts and no event wins. So those 3 detachments, Kion being the superior one, and Montcar for, close behind, it's still balanced, and then Kroot Hunting Pack slightly over the 50% at 52. So if you're in North America and you're playing on GW boards, these are the detachments for you. So you can see how straight away this data is massively different when you look at the terrain formats that are being played on. So I think if there's one thing to take away on this episode alone, is just filter when you're looking at your data, and then don't be listening to everybody, even myself, when I'm like, yeah, this detachment is king, because it might differ to your local meta and also the terrain that you're playing on. Hence why I'm doing my best to kind of give a more broad analysis of the meta on the macro level, rather than just, oh yeah, this is the overall data. So like I mentioned before, Auxiliary CAD 38%, so it's the lowest performing detachment in North America. And then when you look at the meta matchup overview, making sure that this is ticked for North America. Give me 1 second while I adjust this. So, there we go. So you look at Kion, it is
what's it, bullying. So it's bullying Death Guard, 68%. It's bullying Thousand Suns at 64. Necrons at 60. Space Marines at 71. Tyranids at 57. Eldari at 60. Black Templars at 60. Grey Knights at 67. Custodies at 100. Demons at 75. Imperial Agents, 100. Blood Angels at 83. And then Astra Militar at 78. Even Stevens around Imperial Knights at 50%, which is what I said before it should be around about that, because sometimes 4-ups can be the bane of your life, and sometimes you're laughing when they fail them. Dark Angels, Chaos Knights, World Eaters. So because it's being played on GW board, it's working as intended. So Tau's doing very well here against the armies that I mentioned. Death Guard, Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights. On GW, they're nailing all three, which backs up what I said about Tau being able to deal with thick meta because we can tailor to it. On a terrain format that is consistent, has open firing lanes, but also has decent combat staging areas for armies. We're struggling into Chaos Space Marines, for example, or Orcs and Space Wolves. So when they get that kind of, I'm here in this little pocket and I can charge you, it's clearly going in their favor. So this terrain format is perfectly balanced. It's offering both the combat connoisseur something, aka staging areas and way to put pressure on from charges, and then it's offering the shooting gunline army the opportunity to just absolutely blow things out the water if they go down your firing lanes. And I am quite envious of GW layouts, I will be honest, from a UK perspective. And I'm definitely going to be venturing over across the seas to play on some GW. And hopefully it comes to the UK at some point. And then we look at Montcar at 50%, perfectly balanced. Let's have a look at what they're dealing with. So they're overperforming versus Death Guard, lethals, speed, 71%. They're dealing, let's have a look at the Knights. So, that's Grey Knights. Yep, Chaos Knights, 60%. So we're dealing with them. What about Imperial Knights, though? Imperial Knights. Where are they? Oh, come on, there must have been some games against Imperial Knights, right? Am I just being blind? Or have there been no games versus Imperial Knights? I find that very hard to believe. All the Eaters, Astra Metal, Leagues of Votan, Orcs, Chaos Knights. How did they lose to Imperial? Anyway, Imperial Knights, there we are, sorry. Yeah, okay, so not doing too well against Imperial Knights with Montcar. So they're tackling the Death Guard, they're tackling the Imperial Knights, cool. But losing against, Chaos Knights and Death Guard and losing against Imperial Knights. 3 games played. So I think this is something to, I suppose, if people are listening with their own terrain formats, and I know obviously you guys, they've offered so much to the community by offering different ways of playing, and I appreciate it, and I absolutely love the fact that we've got some different terrain formats because it definitely helps diversity in terms of list building and a different way of playing the game. But I do think we're getting into this era now where the terrain formats need to be heavily centered around like the GW terrain formats, and having variations good, but if all their data is just looked at from the GW perspective, then these anomalies and these differences in percentages of performance are never going to get looked at, because if the people doing the data slate aren't looking at these other terrain formats because it's not their own, then we're always going to have these problems. So I don't have the fix, and I'm not pointing fingers. I just think that at the moment it leaves faction specialists in a little bit of a predicament where if your army is good on a terrain format that you do not have access to, you're never going to be reaping the benefits of all the work that the balanced data slate has been doing for that faction, because you're not playing on the format that's been considered when making said changes. And that is a nice segue into the UK. So, the United Kingdom. This is the meta. The United Kingdom has Space Wolves at 62%, Necrons and Imperial Knights at the top 3. Space Wolves at 62, Necrons at 61, and Imperial Knights at 59. But then again, no event wins from them. They're just doing really well. And then you got Thousand Suns, Death Guard at 58 with 2 event wins. And then you got Leagues of Votann with an event win at 53. So the event wins aren't always attached to right at the top, but then the percentage of the meta is 2%, so very unlikely to walk into Space Wolves. And then you've got Imperial Knights 6% and 4% Necrons. That's 12%. So maybe, if you look at a 10, so like 1 in every 10 games, even though you're not doing 10 games an event, you might go into one of these factions. And then obviously if you look at the rest here, so that's like 12%. If you just round it out of the top 5, the top 5, one out of your 5 games, you're going to be going into either Death Guard, T-Suns. Where's it gone? For some reason. Okay, I think it's just reset. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so that's roughly 20%. And you're going to go into one of these 5 armies. Either Space Wolves, Necrons, Imperial Knights, T-Suns, or Death Guard. And then Tau. Where be Tau? We're at the bottom. Outside of Imperial Agents, but there's no players playing Imperial Agents. There's been 5 games played, so that's 1 player since the chapter approved has been running Imperial Agents. Okay? Tau's at the bottom at 37%. But the player population is 3%. So it's 1% less than America. So there's a lot of Tau players in the UK. And yet we're at the bottom at 37%. And I'm included in that percentage. I haven't been to many events as much as I've been doing recently, but 37%. The only event that I went to was the Leeds one. And we're at 37. And if you look at the detachments, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, 60% win rate for auxiliary cadre. Why is that? Well, it looks to be is indicating that if you have good gun with the ability of being fast and you've got combat to back it up, you're going to do well on the current UKTC maps. So the frustration at the moment felt by UK players across the board, and the same, I suppose, with the UKTC organisers, is that the feedback that they're getting is it's contradicting itself. It's been apparently overwhelmingly positive from representation from UKTC, saying we've received this feedback, we've made the 2.2 changes, and it's a beta version, so they are looking to improve it along the way, running up to LGT, and I commend them for it because we've got a beta version that we can actually test and play around with and hopefully get it to a point where it's phenomenal, and I'm sure it will do, but at the moment it's just not fit for purposes, but it's conflicting feedback that they're getting. They're being told that it's really, really good for a shooting army, and then other shooting armies are going, no, it's not. And then combat armies are like, it's really great for a combat army, but then other combat players are saying, well, no, it's not. So the fact is that there's a reason why it's split down the middle, positive and negative. And I can answer this from a shooting perspective. If you've got fast gun, it is good on UKTC, especially on like the round 1 where you exist on the firing lanes on the flanks and you can just dominate. But if you're not fast enough to get there, you're not going to get your firing lanes. Therefore, you're not doing the one thing that a monophase faction wants to do, which is shoot. If you don't have access to driving through walls, you're not going to be able to get there. AKA, Tau don't have access to that, but Imperial Guard do. So if you can't go through terrain and you can't be fast enough to get to those firing lanes, your army doesn't work. Hence why Town is struggling. Combat armies, if you've got combat, but you've got no way of advancing and charging or going through walls, if it's like a big thing, you're going to struggle because the moment you step out, and most combat armies don't have big elements of shooting, they might have a few, but they just get shot and killed or screened. But if you've got a plethora of fast-moving combat units, like Emperor's Children, for example, or Orcs in the War, or Blood Angels with advance and charge, you're going to do well. But if you're a slow-moving combat army, you're not. So I think that's the divide in terms of the feedback, but specifically drawing it back down to, back around to Tau, you've got auxiliary performing at 60% because we've got fast gun. We can take cold stars. We can take crisis suits that can get into position. We can also give something advance and shoot if we wanted to with the stratagem. And then we've also got combat, which can also be fast combat because we can advance auto advance, advance on charge, and get into position with our guerrillas, our rampagers. So that kind of backs up what I've said before, so I'm not just chatting shit. You know, we've got access to both fast gun and fast combat, but it's CP intensive, and I did a video on auxiliary cadre and talked about all the pros and the cons of this detachment. But in the UK, it's doing very well at 60%. And then the next one is retaliation, that's doing bang on balanced. And the reason for this is that, well, retaliation doesn't really care about terrain because you've got 6-inch deep strike, and there's still like open areas where you can, you know, if the opponent wants to screen it, they have to be exposed, and then you can just gun them down. So retaliation is perfectly balanced for this because, again, terrain isn't really a big factor. And then we also have fire and fade, which means that we don't have to trade resources in the same way that an army that doesn't have fire and fade would have to, you know, go, I'm sending unit A out to kill your unit A, and then you've lost your unit A, but I lose my unit A, so on and so forth. We don't really have that issue because we just go out, kill unit A, fire and fade, and they can't kill our unit A. And then we've got Montcar at 45%. So Montcar is actually the highest over rep. So we have 33 games played, player count 7. And then 4-0 event starts at 29. No event wins, but Montcar allows you to have that fast gun, especially with the scout moves. You can completely get into those positions to get your firing lanes. And you can watch me do that on the UKTC TV stream versus Ben Jones. I'm able to get into position to lay down Withering Firepower turn 1 and pop all of his transports apart from one. So again, fast gun, good. But if it's slow, I would have never done what I did to Ben Jones on stream with Kion, for example. I just wouldn't have been able to get there. So that's the big difference, as you can see straight away from the stats. Auxiliary card, rubbish, underperforming, should I say, in America, but it's overperforming in the UK. Whereas Kion is massively underperforming in the UK, but overperforming in North America. And then it's balanced on WTC. So I suppose you could flip it, right? You could say that Kion is, GW is making Kion need to get nerfed. And let's just say, if you were to look at that percentage and suddenly way more Tau players represented Kion in America, and then that pushed our win rate up to a dangerous position of like getting nerfed, then Kion would get nerfed even further. And then anybody playing Kion or wanting to play Kion in the UK would be suffering, not benefiting, because we're at 28%. We're not broken, we're actually struggling, and now we've had nerfs to our faction, this particular detachment, and we're feeling the pinch more than what you guys are going to feel it, because, you know, you've been running on a terrain format that's suited. But then in the same way on auxiliary CAD, if we are, again, performing very well and GW starts to kind of make changes to detachments rather than just overall blanket things, then the UK is going to get auxiliary CAD nerfed, but then anybody that's playing auxiliary CAD in North America at 38% win is going to feel the pinch in the same way that we would if Kion was nerfed. So it's really interesting in terms of the breakdown of the data and how do you approach balancing when there's 3 different terrain formats and 3 different sets of results. Whereas obviously anybody in Europe playing Kion at 50% is like, well, we're at 50%, so it's perfectly balanced, right? But then also be like, oh, wait, we've been nerfed, but it's perfectly balanced. It's just wild. So finally, just to kind of round this up, let's go into the meta matchup overview and make sure that obviously UK has been picked. So all the way at the bottom, that's painful. Imperial Ages is 20% and we're at 37%. We're only 17% higher than the worst faction in the game. It's not even a real faction. Okay, so Kion at 28%. So Kion is, let's try to remain slightly positive as best we can. What are they doing well into? Okay, Custodes, Space Marines, 1 game played, Imperial Agents, GSC, Leagues of Votan. Everything else is pretty much a red at 50% World Eaters. Bad into Chaos Knights, 0%. Bad into Death Guard, 0%. Blood Angels, 33% win rate. Where's the Imperial Knights? Where is that Imperial Knights? There's no Imperial Knights played, I don't think. Oh, no, Imperial 8. Oh, no, Imperial Knights. Sorry, Imperial Knights, 100%. Awesome. Cool. That one player is beat. Well done. But everything else is red. Hence at 28%. And if you look at the overperforming auxiliary card, it's beating Custodes, it's beating Eldari, it's beating Dark Angels, it's beating Imperial Knights. It's losing against Space Marines, it's losing against Demons, and it's 50% win rate versus Death Guard and 50% win rate against CSM. So, doing extremely well. Now, hopefully you've really enjoyed this breakdown. And I know it's been a lot of information, and I'm not going through any lists or anything like that. I purely wanted to kind of give you my perspective on the differences between the metas across the world. And if you like this content, please let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I always love reading the comments, and despite whether you have a different view to me or not, it's irrelevant. I like to see the engagement from the community talking about what they're passionate about and giving me ideas for future videos and telling me, like, I like this, do this more, or do less of this and more of this. I'm completely open to new content going forward. I've got stuff planned in, but I think this has been a really useful session to tell you about the differences between how Tau's performing in one part of the world and how it's performing differently in another part. So thank you very much for watching. Take care, and please like, comment, and subscribe. The usual things for my YouTube algorithm. And if you really want to know more about the Puretide program and join and get the most out of me and improve your performance, the link is in the description below, and you can join at 3 different tiers: the Pathfinder, the Shasspray, and Chassels. And honestly, it'll be the best investment you ever make. Thank you very much. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your week.